This is History of Sexuality in the U.S., Lecture 4D, Part 1, the overview of sexual liberation. So today in the video lectures, I'll be talking about the topic of sexual liberation, talking about the 1960s and 1970s. At the same time this week that we're thinking about the 60s, 70s, and then on Thursday, the 80s and 90s, we're also going to keep stranger intimacy in mind. We've got a couple chapters left that are focused on the early 20th century, but are going to be important as we're also working this week on document analysis number 3, thinking about Loving v. Virginia, and putting that in conversation with one primary document of your choice, as well as stranger intimacy and one self-selected secondary source. Now, I'm going to give you feedback later this week. You probably won't get it until Wednesday or Thursday on your second document analysis. And also on Thursday at noon, I will do an open Zoom drop-in if you have any questions about that third document analysis. Once you finish that, you want to think about which one of your pieces you might like to revise and expand for the final exam. The details about that are now available under assignments, and so you can take a look. It's going to take just another week or so for you to get the feedback on that third document analysis, so you don't need to decide right away, and you've got a few other things to work on, but you want to be thinking about which one of your analyses you might like to add a little evidence to, add a little analysis to, and expand out as your final takeaway piece from this course. The other thing you want to think about is this is our second to last week, and so I know some of us might be flagging in terms of energy. I know I am a little bit, but I'm also feeling energized because I know that the end is close, and I know that we can finish strong together and get to the summer, wrap this really bizarro quarter up, and hopefully, get some good rest. So if there are any things left in the course, if you've fallen behind on anything, make sure you're catching up. The readings for the last week are available, and we've got some very last discussions and quizzes to work on next week, as I will be working on grading your third document analysis, and you'll be thinking about which thing you want to revise. As always, if there's any questions, reach out and let me know, or pop into Thursday's Zoom chat. Thinking about today, after you've watched the overview, we've got 4 talks thinking about the 1960s and 1970s. First, beginning thinking about some important reforms, mostly in the legal area, that are going to reshape the terrain of the regulation of sexuality. We're going to see that thinking about controlling bodies and reproduction is going to shift from this very direct set of legal penalties and controls to a very different system that looks more like it honors individual choice, but at the same time is often reproducing some of the same exclusions we've seen in earlier eras. In the third part, I'll talk about some rebellions, some important movements of the 1960s and 70s that are revolutionizing how we talk and think about sexuality in ways that are very confrontational with dominant power. These forces may have led to something that we might call the sexual revolution, but whether or not this era constitutes a revolution properly, or if we're just looking at reform, perhaps we're looking at something called sexual liberalism, perhaps we're looking at sexual liberation. There are a lot of different terms and debates for thinking about this. So we're going to see what are the products, what are the results of this tumult. These reforms and these rebellions together are reshaping sexual life after this era. So what's different and what has stayed the same? Finally, in part 5, I'm going to talk about some revisions. And though we'll begin with some exciting and important changes, we're going to see some of the limits of them come into play, especially as the 1970s go on. And a conservative backlash mounts against a lot of the victories that we see in the late 60s and early 70s. So that's our path for today, starting in the mid-60s, looking at this era in which a lot of different movements, a lot of different rebellions, a lot of different attempts at revolution are starting to pop off, and we're going to see a lot of different responses, some of which take in some of this energy and try to change and try to reform, and other things that are going to become very brittle and ossified, and attempt to roll back these changes as we get into Thursday's talk on the 80s and 90s. For now, though, tune in to part 2 to learn about some important legal reforms. Keep watching and keep learning.